to my channel. Today we will be continuing to read Out of the Shadows, Reimagining Gay Men's Lives by Walt Odets. We are continuing gay men's relationships. Attraction and the loss of attraction. During our work together, Lester had mentioned only in passing the other often mentioned impediment to sex within ongoing relationships, loss of attraction. Both attraction and its loss are usually experienced as somehow autonomous, immutable feelings, often elusively explained with words such as type, chemistry, or spark. All three are certainly part of the human experience, but as often used, the terms provide an incomplete understanding of attraction, and particularly the loss of attraction in otherwise bonded and loving relationships. A type is often about physical appearance, but it sometimes includes a certain type of person, an intellectual nerd, a kind man, or a sports hero, that the physical presentation suggests. Attractions to types are often tied to associations learned from early life experience, sexual or otherwise, and the connection is often unconscious. The idea of chemistry and spark seem rooted in something broader, a sense of the total person, rather than just the physical appearance. It is this broader idea of attraction that suggests something important about the loss of attraction. It is rarely a simple loss of physical attraction, a single brain synapse somehow suddenly and irrevocably disconnected. Loss of attraction is connected to a shift in other feelings. In this construction, the loss of physical attraction is only one result of some mix of conscious and unconscious feelings that can be understood and sometimes changed. The feelings that can influence a loss of physical attraction are legion, boredom and sex with a familiar partner, a learned need to objectify sexual partners, long-standing unconscious feelings about particular physical characteristics, negative non-sexual feelings about the partner, negative feelings about sex itself, and negative feelings about oneself. But the loss of attraction with someone we know and love is almost always emotionally complex. A therapy patient, Tom, told me that he continued to love but had lost sexual attraction to his partner, Farley. When Tom told me that Farley had gained at least 50 pounds, I simply accepted Tom's stated aversion to fat men, but I also asked why Farley had gained so much weight. Tom told me that Farley had lost his job 2 years earlier and had become depressed. Farley spends his time lying morosely on the sofa, eating ice cream. He even sometimes spends the night there. He's withdrawn from you, I said. Exactly, but what's that got to do with his being fat? How do you feel about his withdrawal? I'm furious, and I'm disgusted by his passivity. Feelings like those could make Farley feel sexually unattractive. You may not find weight attractive, but you tell me you still love him, and if you make love to Farley, you make love to a person, not a body. You're telling me that it's the body that's the whole problem. As we worked on the feelings behind the loss of attraction, Tom realized that his feelings for physical types, he liked lithe men, which Farley had once been, were the smaller part of what obstructed Tom's sexual desire in the relationship. Helpfully, Tom had a very strange dream in which he walked into the bathroom, saw Farley standing in the shower, and was shocked to see that Farley had not male genitals, but a vagina. In discussing the dream, Tom realized that Farley's passivity and weight both feminized him. Farley had lost his male body definition, and the weight created a literal barrier that held Tom off physically, just as Farley's depression held Tom off emotionally. Farley's lazy life on the sofa expressed more of a desire for ice cream than for Tom, and Tom felt hurt and abandoned, and that made him angry. Consciously, Tom had experienced all of these feelings as a loss of attraction. When we deeply know and love someone, he feels beautiful, and it is a normal, if inhibitable, human response to feel physically attraction. Human response to feel physical attraction. If we do not recognize that feeling as sexual attraction, we must sometimes reconstruct our idea of what sex is. When, with time and familiarity, a partner is experienced as a whole person, sex with him can no longer be purely erotic sex. A pure history of sports sex leaves many men with three legacies that can be problematic in long-term relationships. They become accustomed to objectifying other men as sexual objects. They are familiar with only the purely erotic component of sex, and they learn to split off sex from relationships and from their day-to-day lives. Lester no longer experienced Bill as sexually attractive because the erotic component of their sex had waned, and they had segregated sex from the rest of their lives. Like their Monopoly evenings, sex was a discrete diversion from their relationship, rather than a natural, fluid extension of the communication and companionship they routinely shared. This was one reason that sex in the kitchen, even if it was only an affectionate lick, was so unimaginable to Lester. The very idea conflated day-to-day life with something that was supposed to be both discrete and discrete. If the discrete component arose from Lester's experience with sports sex, which has nothing to do with feelings or relationships, the need for discretion was spawned by our culture, an erotophobic and shaming society in which sex is treated like defecation, which is never spoken of and occurs in its own special room, the so-called bathroom, which is most often used for its toilet, behind closed doors. Presumably, no one knows what goes on in the special room or has to think about it, but everyone does because everyone uses it. In Lester's family, sex was never once mentioned by anyone. After much conversation, Lester was no longer shocked by the idea of sex in the kitchen, but he remained reluctant to implement it. He told me that he had had many sexual experiences with other men in what he called ABC sex. Sex in alleys, baths, and cars. But not with Bill. The rare sex they did have was reserved for the bedroom. None of his ABC experiences involved relationships or even friendships. And with Bill, Lester continued to segregate sex. Like ABC sex, their sex was not on the continuum of their lives together. It had its time and place. Sex has nothing to do with the rest of our lives, Lester told me. And that, I responded, is precisely my point. From adolescence, Lester had experienced sex, not as communication with another person, but as a physical behavior with another body. This is a male inclination anyway, but now that Lester had not a body but a whole person on his hands, he did not know how to think about sex, and he needed to reconstruct his idea of what it was. The reconstruction of ABC sex into relationship sex would not provide the kind of transcendent, blindingly white-hot sexual experience he experienced in his young ABC days. But it would also not abandon erotic pleasure. It would be sex that integrated that pleasure into a physical expression of sharing, companionship, intimacy, and love, all of which Lester and Bill both felt and valued. It would be more like, I suggested to Lester, having dinner, seeing a film, having coffee and cake afterward to discuss the film, and then going back to the car for a blowjob in the parking lot. Or just for the fun of it. You and Bill would do all this together, and the evening would be meaningful. When we spend such an evening with someone, it is an evening with another person we value and love, not an evening with someone's body. Sex is a natural part of such an evening. As I spoke those words to Lester, I had another unvoiced thought. When a lover dies, it is less the loss of the physical presence that feels so impossible than the loss of the mind, the entire, unimaginably rich internal life that had had become a seamless part of our own internal life. We had nurtured our shared mind with companionship and talk, and also with the metaphorical act of sharing our bodies. We had entered each other in both senses of the idea. In such a relationship, we do not have sex. We make love in a private, two-person world that feels as large and timeless as the entire universe. That is relationship sex in its purest, most powerful expression. And we are fortunate, I thought, to find that other person once in a lifetime. Lester, I said, you and Bill would really benefit from reconstructing your sense of what sex is. You might find magic. A songbook for young men. How gay people experience their relationships is significantly influenced by how American society treats those relationships. Today, gay men still live on the fringes of a heterosexist society that is only narrowly comprehending and supportive of emotionally intimate relations between men. Current public gay agendas suggest that marriage is the solution for this marginalization, even as the Pew Research Center reports that America has seen decades of declining marriage rates, and that today the share of American adults who have never been married is at an historic high. One obvious explanation for a gay inversion of the larger social trend is the common gay adolescent experience of hopelessness about ever finding someone to love and be loved by. A legally binding marriage with socially defined expectations can feel as if it will finally allow the seemingly impossible to be real and permanent. Like many heterosexuals, gay men sometimes pursue marriage as a form of ownership that ensures fidelity and locks in a partner for life. But gay men have found good and enduring relationships without marriage, and we know that for millennia, socially constructed marriages have been fraught with conflict, furtive and deceitful, non-monogamy, and acrimonious separations and divorce. So what else motivates gay people to marry? Gay relationships are now most readily accepted and supported when dressed with the crown jewel of the heterosexual social plan, legal marriage. Society has famously bestowed rights, privileges, and protections on those wearing the jewel, and the pragmatic appeal of legal marriage is thus obvious. But why have gay agendas pushed for marriage rather than the decoupling of marriage from rights and privileges for all citizens? And even with the lonely adolescent experience in mind, why emotionally would LGBT people want to participate in a heterosexual convention with such a problematic history? Convention that has also served as the standard against which gay lives have been stigmatized. These questions are important because, among all the rights and privileges gay communities have pursued over the last half-century, legal marriage is the one aimed squarely at deconstructing and reconstructing gay relationships, and thus at the core of what it means to be gay and live a gay life. Among gay men, the most often stated, non-pragmatic reason for marriage is simple and compelling. Many couples wish to make a personal statement of commitment to each other. Through participation in a social institution that has long stood as the icon of commitment. In taking mutual vows, men hope their relationships will feel more valuable to themselves and, though not as often explicitly stated, less marginalized by others. Even as adults, a large majority, particularly those within stigmatized, marginalized groups, seek approval for their lives and hope that approval will find expression in acceptance and love. In June of 2015, shortly before the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, appealed for donations with the idea that marriage in all 50 states would allow gay people to be welcomed in their communities as married couples. The language suggests that the issue at hand is others welcoming acceptance of gay relationships, but it only implies that a marriage might allow gay people to feel differently about their own relationships. communication relies on an unstated idea. If others held more esteem for gay relationships, then gay people could feel more esteem for them, too. More broadly and succinctly, gay people need others' esteem to feel esteem for themselves. Given human life as it is often lived and experienced, there is some truth in this idea, and with the beginning of a shift in American social values, the idea even offers some hope. But this is not the whole truth for gay people living in America today. An outside-in approach to the development of self-esteem is necessarily how children grow. The esteem of adults is internalized by the child, providing a foundation upon which he slowly constructs a positive internal sense of self. But for adults, the esteem of others is rarely adequate when the internal sense of self has been significantly injured by early life stigmatization and shaming. There is no adequate internal foundation of self-esteem on which external contributions can stand. Without that foundation, one is attempting to fill a bottomless hole that swallows the external esteem almost as quickly as it is delivered. Such a life requires an impossibly consistent flow of outside esteem and is a wobbling and too vulnerable life. Whenever the flow stops, the internal life collapses again. Such a deficit of self-esteem must be explored and changed internally, and legally mandated rights and privileges, even with their obvious justice and longer-term possibilities, will rarely by themselves accomplish that end. As adults, those with difficult early life experience must usually work for a reasonable measure of inside-out self-acceptance. Even if legal marriage were to legitimize gay lives and relationships in the eyes of society and gay men themselves, another issue stands between gay men and truthful conventional marriage. As traditionally defined, marriage is inconsistent with much of gay male life as it is actually lived. Marriage is a binding legal agreement that specifies commitment to hell or high water, lifelong monogamous relationships that are traditionally focused on the breeding and rearing of children. It is no coincidence that within 6 months of the Supreme Court decision favoring gay marriage, the Human Rights Campaign made the right to adopt a child in their home state its #1 agenda item. Elementary school bullying, which is a primary source of the inadequate self-esteem that outside-in esteem will not repair, was #2 on the list. Job security against firing for being gay, probably on the Monday following Saturday's celebrated and publicized wedding, was #3. Such an agenda is heavily biased in favor of older men. Some older men do want children, and they should clearly have the right to adopt. But early life bullying and job security are much more immediate and critical issues, particularly for gay children and young men, who are the future of gay life in America. For many younger men, and many older ones too, the HRC's old man agenda feels like pandering for acceptance by attempting to weave gay lives into an often meaningless heterosexual social fabric. If older gay men wish to adopt and mentor, the young gay men ignored by today's community's agendas would be a valuable place to start. Young men must know that, even as they live in increasingly conventionalized communities, they will not be marginalized by their own communities for leading unconventional gay lives. In the pursuit of acceptance through conformity, stigmatized communities too easily marginalize their own nonconformers, and the persistent celebration of marriage as the crowning achievement of gay people in America is a step in that direction. Were it not for developmentally and post-adolescent hopelessness about relationships, the pragmatic benefits, and the fight against social marginalization, it seems unlikely that many gay people would even consider marriage as the model for their lives. Everyone already knows that half of all marriages fail, and it is likely that half of the other half should be mercifully terminated. But what are the alternatives for gay people? As a gay man and psychologist, I know that the idea of anyone independently deciding on the form and content of his life and relationships is an idea more easily suggested than implemented. Among social animals, the outsider's default aspiration is to be on the inside, and for the highly social human animal, assimilation through marriage with the actual construction or mere appearance of a normal life has obvious appeal. Gay men have usually grown up as outsiders, and outsiders often hope to present themselves as just like insiders and receive the benefits and approval that insiders grant other insiders. But psychologically, the question remains. Are men who fall in love with other men and get married just like heterosexual men in conventional marriages? Both gay lives and gay relationships have a long, necessarily independent history of improvisation and invention, largely born of a gay sensibility. Without traditional social models to draw on, gay men have had to discover ways to be themselves in a manner that straight men with a ready-made life plan never have. For gay men, married or not, the task of discovery persists. The benefits of improvisation and invention are considerable. They allow us to be and live as ourselves. Gay lives and relationships are often more expressive of the natural, inborn range of human feelings and experience than conventional marriage models prescribe or allow for men and for women. Relationships between gay men, human, good, and valuable relationships, are not only expressions of traditional romantic love, they are also often fraternal, paternal, non-monogamous, or polyamorous, and communal, and they are often thoughtfully and honestly so. Society, and some gay men, critically judge such unconventional inventions and use them as evidence that gay relationships do not work, even as the same inventions are non-explicitly or deceitfully implemented in many heterosexual unions. The improvisation and inventions of gay male couples are obviously not, in themselves, problematic or pathological. They are simply inconsistent with the stated terms of conventional marriage. The useful measure of success for gay relationships must not be how society experiences, but how gay men experience their lives together, how relationships do or do not support the happiness, satisfaction, and growth of those involved. Gay men crafting their lives and relationships must try to reconstruct one important principle that society and its conventional relationships have persistently distorted. This is the principle of fidelity as honesty and truth. Fidelity is not about the appearance or reality of monogamy or guarantees of lifelong love that no one can honestly make. Fidelity, the real fidelity that makes relationships important and humanly decent, is simply about being truthful. When a relationship does not improve something one partner needs, is otherwise in difficulty, or clearly no longer works, fidelity is respectfully saying this and empathetically talking it through. If gay people are to live their lives, it will not be by mimicking a society that only accepts relationships that follow its rules, rules that it does not actually honor. That society has insisted that its love is somehow better or more real than that of gay people, which is an obvious untruth. That society, fearful that in others' freedom it will see its own limitations, deceptions, or envy, has demonstrated prohibitions and hatred for unconventional forms of bonding and love that have persisted for millennia against all odds. Some gay men do truly desire conventionally defined marriages. Others need them for acceptance and approval or assurance of ownership. Others dismiss marriage as irrelevant to their lives. One consequence of this newly possible diversity is that gay communities today feel less coherent. They are less coherent, but this suggests growth, not fragmentation, but only if gay men do not marginalize one another. The early years of the Mattachine Society and homosexual rights, the post-Stonewall gay liberation movement, and the early epidemic all fostered a coherence within gay communities that was significantly formed around fights against active oppression or emotional and physical death. This is the kind of forced coherence that beleaguered minorities often experience, but it is misleading. For gay men, those three historical periods created many strange bedfellows, men who, in any regard other than their fight against the common enemy, would have found little of interest in one another. If communities of gay people today have evolved into something more diverse, and that diversity is allowed and supported, all the better. The married Smiths, living with their two adopted children in a Chelsea rooftop condo, have never had much in common with the radical theories in rural Tennessee, other than societal oppression and the slaughter of an epidemic. Today, they have less of both enemies and less to unite them. So-called gay communities in America have always been more defined by their outsiderness than by the diverse characteristics of their insiders. Even as gay men share many feelings, including, of course, the famous homosexual feeling, there has never been a gay community in any emotional or relational sense. I have spoken with innumerable young men who grew up as outsiders and moved to San Francisco's Castro in the hope of finding a sense of belonging in a large outsider community. Many have been deeply disappointed, and many live in loneliness and a new form of outsiderness, still hoping that the gay community will take them in. Even as they wait, they also blame themselves for somehow not making it happen, just as they blamed themselves for their outsiderness when they were children and adolescents. Fortunately, the disappointed hopes of these young men is significantly a problem of scale, a problem rooted in misperception that in American society exists. America is not a coherent society or community, but an idea that leaves many Americans feeling like outsiders, and the communities in which young gay outsiders then seek belonging and insiderness. The Castro, West Hollywood, and Chelsea are also just ideas. From within such male geographic communities, young men must find their own real communities of 4, 6, or 8 devoted and enduring companions. That accomplishment is important and affirming in everything a human life could hope for and need. The futures of young gay lives will not be transformed through assimilation into gay communities seeking seamless internal unity, or through assimilation into an often ugly, contentious, and divisive American society. The transformation will happen when, one by one, each man discovers who he is and makes a life for himself that expresses that self-discovery. Gay lives will be diverse, but all will share one important aspect. They will be honest lives that stand on authentic self-acceptance. When they were young, today's older gay men had no socially constructed models for their lives, unless they were willing to live largely false lives. Bachelor lives or heterosexual married lives, often paralleled by secret lives that sustained adolescent histories of ultimately unfulfilling, surreptitious, and relationless sex. The alternative to a false life was an authentic, emotionally constructed life with another man that demanded discretion and secrecy, or indiscretion and the risk of painful marginalization. Today's young men have more choices, which is both an opportunity and a danger. In navigating this broader range of possibilities, young men have an advantage over older men. Their emotional trajectories and lives are not yet codified, and their futures are almost entirely in front of them. Young people are curious and resilient, and even when emerging from adverse early life experience, they hold a capacity for discovery and change. But in working with gay men in therapy for a third of a century, I am most struck by one great tragedy. In childhood, Most have been handed a rule book of limitations to live by, rather than a songbook of possibilities. Young gay men can and must find ways to allow themselves to sing. All the diverse forms that true gay life has improvised constitute a special universe that should not be relinquished to meet the expectations of a pathological society. In that universe lies something wonderful, men in love who have discovered themselves and, by their own invention, are among the splendors of human life on earth. The life of Matthias Johnston, a life I was fortunate to share, is such a story of discovery and self-discovery, and I tell it to the best of my recollection in the following closing chapter.